Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into something huge, something that's really captured the public imagination. Bitcoin.
Absolutely. It holds this powerful allure, doesn't it? This idea of, mathematical certainty, maybe escaping banks, government control.
A return to sound money, as they often call it. It's a very strong narrative.
It really is. And our goal today is to kind of unpack that narrative. We're going to deconstruct what some of our sources call the Bitcoin myth.
Right, to see if this elegant design actually leads to a stable future, or if it could be more like a straitjacket, maybe leading to, well, economic problems.
Exactly. We're looking at analyses suggesting Bitcoin isn't just neutral tech. It's framed as a culmination of a long-running political project.
Built on, what, a distrust of democratic institutions,
Yeah.
and maybe a specific understanding of money itself.
Precisely. And its core ideas, the fixed supply, the deflationary tendency, the aversion to credit proponents, see these as strengths.
But the critics, they argue these are actually flaws, bugs even, that could cripple a modern economy's ability to adapt, to grow, respond to crises.
So for you listening, here's the plan. First, we'll dig into Bitcoin's roots at the Austrian School of Economics, the cypherpunks. Where did this idea come from?
Then we'll shift gears. How does money actually work in countries like the US or UK? We'll look at sovereign money, debt, debunk some common myths maybe.
Yeah, try to clear up some misconceptions there. And finally, we'll run a kind of simulation. What might happen if we did adopt a Bitcoin standard? We'll look at historical parallels.
This is like a packed agenda. Let's start with part one, the anatomy of a myth, sort of deconstructing this sound money idea.
Okay, so the key starting point in many analyses is that Bitcoin's design isn't accidental. It's seen as a technological embodiment of a very specific worldview.
A computational answer to an old political complaint almost.
You could put it that way. And a major influence cited is the Austrian School. Think Ludwig von Mises back in the early 20th century.
Okay, Mises.
Yeah.
What was his core argument?
He saw the government's control over money as a huge threat to liberty. Inflation, for him, wasn't just bad economics. It was a moral crime, like stealth taxation.
So governments could spend without explicit consent by just, well, inflating the currency.
That was his view. His ideal was sound money, something like gold, with a limited supply outside political control, to impose, as he put it, unbreakable discipline on governments.
And this thinking continued.
Oh, yes. Friedrich Hayek, probably Mises' most famous student, built on this. He argued central banks actually cause crises by messing with interest rates.
How so?
By keeping rates too low, they encourage bad investments, malinvestments, he called them, unsustainable booms that inevitably bust. He even wrote a book in '76, The Denationalization of Money.
Advocating for private currencies. Wow.
Exactly, competing private monies. And then you have Murray Rothbard, who went even further, an anarcho-capitalist.
An anarcho-capitalist. What did that mean for money?
Well, he basically viewed the state as a criminal gang, the Federal Reserve, a master counterfeiter. His solution was extreme, a 100% gold-backed dollar, only honest money, in his view.
Okay, so you can really see this deep suspicion of the state and this, like, gold standard idealism building up.
Definitely. And this is the intellectual climate that feeds into the next piece, the cypherpunks.
Right. Satoshi Nakamoto, Bitcoin's creator, part of this 90s movement.
Reportedly, yes. The cypherpunks often shared that anti-state libertarian vibe. They wanted to use cryptography to build autonomous digital spaces, beyond government reach. Timothy C. May's Crypto-Anarchist Manifesto is a key text there.
And Satoshi's breakthrough was technical, but served this goal.
Absolutely. Solving the double spending problem without needing a bank or central authority was the genius move. It allowed for a trustless system, verification through code and consensus, not institutions.
And the launch timing, January 2009, that wasn't accidental, was us right in the middle of the financial crisis.
Seems unlikely. And that message embedded in the first block. The Times 03 Jan 2009 Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. It reads like a digital protest note.
So connecting the dots, Bitcoin's design features directly reflect these grievances.
That's the argument. The 21 million coin limit. A digital gold standard preventing debasement. The decentralized network, censorship-resistant, proof of work, gets rid of the need for trusted third parties like banks.
And books like The Bitcoin Standard make this link explicit, right? Trying to get money out of politics.
They do. The claim is that this isn't about making a better Venmo. It's presented by some as a way to, defund the state, enforce global algorithm-driven austerity.
Replacing democratic choices with .code.
Yeah.
an immutable, unforgiving dogma of an algorithm.
That's the critical framing, yes. A very radical vision.
But which brings us neatly to part two. Okay, if that's the vision Bitcoin is built on, how does money and debt actually work in reality according to modern understanding?
Right. Because the Austrian-inspired view often rests on this analogy that governments are like households, need to earn or borrow first.
And you're saying that's wrong, at least for some governments.
Well, many economists, especially those using MMT insights, argue it's fundamentally misleading for a monetarily sovereign nation. Think the US, UK, Japan countries issuing their own currency, not pegged, floats freely.
Okay, so what's the alternative view? How did money start, if not barter?
The historical evidence, like David Graeber outlined in Debt, the first 5,000 years, suggests it wasn't about swapping goods. Money likely started as a unit of account, a social tool for tracking debts. Who owes what to whom?
So less a thing and more. A ledger, an IOU system.
Exactly. And today, most money is just digital ledger entries, relationships of credit and debt, financial IOUs, basically.
And who creates most of this money? Not the government.
Nope. This is key. The vast majority is created by private commercial banks when they make loans. It's called endogenous money creation.
Wait, so banks don't lend out savings people have deposited?
That's the common misconception. But institutions like the Bank of England have been clear. Banks create new money when they issue a loan, like a mortgage.
Oh, just like that.
Essentially, yes. With keystrokes. They create a new asset for themselves, your loan IOU, and simultaneously, a new liability that they deposit in your account. Money created out of thin air, as they say.
So loans create deposits, not the other way around.
Precisely. Which means the money supply isn't fixed, it's elastic, dynamic. It expands when there's demand for credit. Bitcoin's fixed supply is the total opposite of this.
Okay, that's banks.
Yeah.
What about the sovereign government itself, the currency issuer?
They play by different rules entirely. A government that issues its own fiat currency literally cannot run out of it.
Like a stadium scorekeeper can't run out of points.
That's a great analogy. They create the points. So, contrary to the household idea, they don't need to tax or borrow their own currency before they spend.
They spend first. How does that work?
When the government pays salaries, builds infrastructure, sends social security checks, it just credits bank accounts. Poof! New money enters the private sector. Spending creates the currency.
And taxes. What are they for then, if not funding spending?
Several things from this MMT perspective. 1, taxes drive demand for the currency. You need dollars to pay U.S. taxes, right? That gives the dollar value.
Okay, makes sense. What else?
2, managing inflation. If the economy overheats, taxes withdraw purchasing power, cool things down. And 3, social policy. Redistributing wealth, discouraging smoking, encouraging green energy, whatever.
So taxes delete money. They don't fund spending directly.
In this view, yes, they delete it from the private sector's balance sheet.
Mind blow. Okay, so what about the national debt? It's not like my credit card debt.
Not really. The national debt is better understood in this framework as the total amount of government currency spent into the economy that hasn't yet been taxed back. It's the private sector's savings in government IOUs, essentially.
So a government deficit equals a private sector surplus, always.
By accounting identity, yes. Government spending adds financial assets to the private sector. Taxes remove them. A deficit means the government added more than it removed. That difference is the private sector's net financial savings from government activity.
So those Clinton-era surpluses, were they actually bad?
Well, some analyses argue they force the private sector into deficit, making households and firms borrow more. They suggest this draining of net financial assets contributed to the fragility that led to the dot-com bust.
Wow, so applying a Bitcoin standard globally.
Would impose that flawed household analogy everywhere, critics argue. It could destroy the very flexibility that allows governments and central banks to stabilize economies.
Which leads us right into part 3. Simulating this Bitcoin standard. What would it actually look like? A blueprint for depression, as some sources dramatically put it.
It's a stark prediction, but based on certain economic principles. The first major issue flagged is guaranteed deflation.
Because the money supply is fixed, but the economy hopefully grows, so each Bitcoin buys more over time.
Exactly. Prices would generally fall. Bitcoiners often see this as good, your money's worth more tomorrow. But economists worry it creates a poisonous incentive.
To hoard money.
Yes, the paradox of thrift, writ large. Why spend or invest today if things will be cheaper tomorrow, and just holding Bitcoin gives you a return? It punishes spending, investment, risk-taking.
And what about wages? They don't fall easily, right?
They tend to be sticky downwards. So if prices are falling but wages aren't, Businesses get squeezed, profits evaporate,
Right.
leading to
Layoffs, mass layoffs.
potentially. And that kicks off a vicious cycle. Less spending, less production, more layoffs, lower incomes, even less spending. The dreaded deflationary spiral.
Sounds bad. But what about debt? Most people have mortgages, loans.
That's where it gets truly devastating, according to the debt deflation theory, highlighted by Irving Fisher way back. Those debts are usually fixed in nominal terms, say $2,000 a month mortgage. But if prices and your wages are falling, the real burden of that fixed payment goes up and up. That $2,000 feels like $2,100, then $2,200 in terms of what you have to give up to pay it.
Leading to defaults, bankruptcies.
A potential tsunami of them, as Fisher warned. Widespread financial collapse.
Is there any history to back this up? Or is it just theory?
Well, critics point to the Great Depression. The gold standard then acted a bit like a Bitcoin standard, fixed supply, limited policy response. It transmitted the crisis globally and made it deeper.
And didn't countries that left gold recover faster?
Generally, yes, like Britain in 1931. And more recently, Japan's lost decades, starting in the 90s, mild deflation, but it created this stagnant, deflationary mindset.
Which was only broken by huge stimulus, right? The opposite of Bitcoin's philosophy.
Exactly. Policies totally incompatible with a fixed money supply, which highlights another critical point: helplessness in a crisis.
No monetary policy.
Yeah.
Central banks couldn't do anything.
Nothing effective. Can't cut interest rates if there's no central bank managing rates. Can't provide emergency liquidity if the supply is fixed. Governments become powerless spectators.
And no fiscal policy either. Government spending.
Well, think about it. On a Bitcoin standard, the government is just a currency user, like you or me. If there's a recession, tax revenues plummet.
So they'd have less money just when they need to spend more to support the economy.
Precisely. They'd be forced into pro-cyclical austerity, slashing spending, firing people, making the downturn worse, a potential fiscal death spiral.
We saw something like this with Greece in the Eurozone crisis, didn't we?
That's often cited as a direct parallel. Countries using a currency they didn't issue, stripped of policy tools, forced into brutal austerity by the Troika, man-made depressions, some called it, a preview of a Bitcoin world, perhaps?
Yeah, and one last point. What about credit? Starting a business, getting an education loan.
Critics argue a Bitcoin economy would struggle with meaningful credit creation. What we see in crypto lending or DeFi today, it's often described as just pawnshop finance.
Meaning?
It's mostly collateralized lending. You need existing assets, crypto, to borrow against. It helps existing wealth holders leverage up, maybe speculate, but it doesn't easily fund new production or opportunities for those without assets.
So a small business with a great idea but no collateral. A student needing a loan.
They'd likely be out of luck in a purely Bitcoin-based system, this critique suggests. It optimizes for preserving old wealth, not creating new wealth. Sterile preservation, not dynamic creation.
Okay, that's a pretty stark picture. But surely the Bitcoin proponents have answers, right? Let's tackle their best defenses.
Absolutely. Defense number one. Inflation is theft. Fiat debases savings. We hear this constantly.
And counter.
Is that moderate managed inflation is often seen as necessary lubricant for a dynamic economy. It eases debt burdens, encourages spending and investment now. Stagnation is the real enemy of long-term wealth, not necessarily mild inflation.
So preserving purchasing power in a dead economy isn't really winning. It's ossification.
That's the argument. You're preserving value in a graveyard. Defense two. Bitcoin is programmable, it will evolve, layers like Lightning Network, etc.
But the core problem isn't the tech interface, it's the economic rules.
Exactly. The fixed supply, the anti-discretion, the hostility to debt, these are fundamental design choices, the reason it exists. Technical workarounds don't change that inflexible macroeconomic foundation. You can't just paper over it.
Okay. Defense three. But DeFi,
What?
credit exists in crypto.
And the counter remains. It's mostly pawnshop finance, collateralized, not forward-looking. It shuffles existing wealth. It doesn't fundamentally create credit for new, uncollateralized ventures based on future potential.
Right, and the final one, to kind of catch all, it's early days, it's not meant to replace everything yet.
Which, critics say, kind of concedes the point. The criticisms aren't about whether the UI is slick. They're about the core ideological design, fixed supply, deflationary bias. These are features to proponents, not bugs to be fixed later.
And arguing it's not ready implicitly admits the current system, with all its flaws.
It actually does support billions of lives. It's adaptive, it responds, it allocates resources, it evolves. Saying Bitcoin might work someday isn't a replacement for what works, however imperfectly, today.
So wrapping this up, the Bitcoin promised sound money, freedom, is powerful. But the critical analysis suggests the reality could be very different.
Indeed. The strength is portrayed as brittle rigidity, the stability as the stillness of economic death. By misinterpreting sovereign finance, rejecting credit, enshrining deflation.
It potentially creates a system designed to amplify crises and strip away the tools to fight them, enforcing permanent austerity.
That's the core warning from these sources. The modern fiat system has problems, yes, huge ones sometimes. But its key advantage, arguably, is flexibility, adaptability.
It can expand liquidity, fund collective action, allow for error, even forgiveness through inflation or restructuring.
Things Bitcoin, by its very design, cannot do, and seeks mathematical perfection, which sounds great but might be incredibly fragile in the real world.
So it replaces messy human governance with the unforgiving dogma of an algorithm?
That's how critics frame it. Not progress, but a political choice to disable the state, subject society to a machine.
A revolt against modernity. A retreat to a rigid past.
A technologically sophisticated retreat, perhaps. But a retreat nonetheless, based on these analyses, from systems abandoned for good reasons.
Wow. Lots to think about there. What kind of system do we actually want? One that can bend or one that's designed to break under pressure? A really profound question.
It is indeed.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.